Hello again, and welcome back to Making Saturdays Awesome. My name is Chris. I believe you may have seen me in a different video. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about Inkscape. In this video, we're going to be covering how to trace bitmap image, as they'll call it, or a raster image, and turn it into a vector image. We're going to go over a few different ways that happens, and a couple of the different tools that make that job a lot easier. No matter how you approach it, learning how to do it all manually first really helps some of the automatic tools that you can use later so that you can make final tweaks and make things look as good as possible. So let's get started and move over to Inkscape.
Okay, welcome back to Making Saturdays Awesome. All right, let's get started. So one of the first couple things I'm going to show you is opening up Inkscape, and we'll open up Google Chrome as well. Okay, so I'm going to open up Google here, and I'm going to do a quick search to find a design that I like. In this particular case, we're going to work on some sort of cartoon character. I am going to pick Pikachu because it's one of my favorite first generation Pokemon here. And a little tip is that if you can find things that are called clip art, the lines are a little bit simpler. Most of the designs often are free to use and things like that. Now you have to be careful with certain properties and certain characters. They can be copyrighted, but for the sake of, I am going to use the Pikachu here, and I'm going to type in clip art. And as you'll notice, most of these designs are a little bit more simple. Oh, I'm just going to go with the Pikachu head. This will be perfect. So once you find the image that you like, you can go ahead and save the image. I'm going to save this right on my desktop. Once you've found the design that you like, you can take that design, and if you drag it right onto your page in Inkscape, it's going to give you this option. It's going to have the PNG bitmap image import. For some of the tools we're going to use later, it's a little bit easier if we optimize the quality. However, if you have a slow machine, sometimes it's a little bit better to go with optimizing speed. In this case, we're going to choose this for the smooth option and click OK, and it's going to drag that image in. So we're going to go to Path, Trace Bitmap, and that's going to bring up a little menu like this. From here, we want this to find the 4 colors that we have here. So it should be black, yellow, white, and red. I want this to create a group of paths, and I'm going to let it do the 8 scans that it's looking for. And I'm going to click this button to remove background, which should hopefully remove this tiled background that we have here. Now if you click Live Preview, it'll show you a preview of the design that you have. Then we click OK. Nothing should really look different, but then if we go to our selection tool here, we can actually select and move that portion of the design off. So if you notice, this is just the original tracing, and then this is a collection of a bunch of different paths. So I am going to delete this. Okay, now that I've deleted that background portion that I didn't need, I clicked my selector, I double-clicked on the background area of it, but then as you see here, this comes as one whole piece, but then if I use my individual selecting tool and I select portions of it, I can actually take off the layers. Now it'll try to build this in layers that make the most sense to the program. And as you can see, I have the different portions of the colors on these different layers, but that's not necessarily always the most ideal, because maybe that part wasn't needed, and I don't need all of this. So the automatic tracing isn't always going to be the best. Sometimes you'll get a good overall look of it, but it may give you bits of the color that are not really necessary. So let me clear these off, and I'll kind of explain what I mean there. Let's say you're going to do a t-shirt design and you wanted it to be a 4-color t-shirt design. It doesn't need a layer of yellow and then red and then black to make your black. You really could just fill empty space with that. It's actually a waste of ink to be putting all those layers above one another. Plus, sometimes they can be tricky in how they want to look when they're layered above one another. So this isn't necessarily your best bet. But a way that we can do all of that and make it a little bit more consistent is actually tracing this by hand. So one of the first tools I'm going to use here is the pen tool that allows us to draw Bezier curves and straight lines. Now, I like to focus one color layer at a time that's necessary. I am going to zoom in by holding down the control key and scrolling up on my mouse wheel, and I am going to select right in this little corner here. Then I'm going to scroll and click over at this corner. It seems like what I just drew is a little problematic, but the reason for this is there's this tiny little curve up here. So instead of trying to draw a point there and making that point a curve, I can just click here. If I double click in the middle here, I can add a point after switching over to my other selection tool. And now for the sake of making this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to change this stroke to a bright green color so I can see what I'm doing with it a little bit more easily. And then I'm going to drag some of the other portions of this line and move these anchors until they more closely resemble the shape that I'm going for. So as you can see, this lines up pretty nicely onto there, so now I'm just going to do the same thing here. And then sometimes you just do have to add another point just to change the last little bit of that shape that you need. Now that I have this particular section done for this ear, I can then go back to my Bezier tool. I'm going to click on my previous line, and then I'm going to scroll all the way over to the next corner. I always like to work from a corner to a corner so that I can then create all the curves inside of it a little bit easier. Okay, so now I've done the whole outside of those, but I also want to do this little inner area of the cheek, and the reason being is this black line. If I trace this red spot and have that removed from this path here, that's going to make the whole thing one shape. Now, in this particular case, because I have one line that's going to be going over to this side and another one that's going over to this side, I'm actually going to create a closed path with just the one line going down to here, and then the other line going back up. So if I click there, it's going to treat it like it just closed it. I'm going to change this one to green one more time. I'm going to switch over to my node tool, and then if you notice, if I drag this one, that one goes to the one side, and then this one can go to the other. It's because even though it had nothing in the middle, it still treats it like a complete closed shape because the beginning and the end parts of the line, the nodes, were then connected with one another. So then it treated it like a closed path. So now I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Now, I'll show you a little trick. Since this is mostly symmetrical, if I switch over to my Select and Transform tool, and I do Control-C to copy, and then I do Control-V to paste, since it's symmetrical, I should be able to take this, go to Object, Transform, and then one way to do this is because I want this to change in this direction. I can change this by 100%, so I'm stretching the width 100% in the opposite direction, which will then rotate it. I've now saved myself a little bit of effort on this side. Now the last few things that we're going to need to do to finish tracing the black is the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. All of the black parts of this are now traced. What we can do here is if we select each of these, so if I move this, let's say, and I select all of these, we can then go to Path, Combine. That's going to create that all into one shape layer. Now if we change the stroke to none and then fill, you can see where a couple spots weren't completely closed. This is really what it should look like over here. We should have this, and we should also have this removed, so we have a couple pieces that are not fully closed. And the way we can go and check on that and fix it, so then if I go back to stroke, turn the stroke back on, turn the fill off, we can go to discover where the last bits of these are. Now I'm looking here and I see that these two ends are broken, so what that means is those two ends are not coming together. Once we select these two, here, we can click on the button that says to join selected nodes. So that's going to make those two now closed. And then as we scroll down, we can see if there's any other broken nodes. Here we have two that are broken as well. So if we go back to here, we can join the selected nodes. And now, if we did that right, and we select that, it should have filled most of this area. So, since this is all one shape now, we need to do a little bit of extra work here to change up what we have remaining. So, I am going to scroll back in, and I am going to add a point here on this node, and I add a point here on that node. So, if I select everything right here, what I can do is if I go to Path Difference, it's going to cut that piece that I just drew on there from the previous. I'm going to do the same thing for where we drew these circles. If I want to move this back over onto my Pikachu here, I can zoom in. And this is something else interesting. You can take and go to your fill, and if you drag this A slider down, it'll actually make it more transparent or translucent. So in this case, I'm actually going to draw a circle like this, just to get it to match pretty close. I'm going to move that piece out. I'm going to select all of this. I'm going to go back to Path and Difference. You notice it did the one, not the other. So what we're going to do is we're going to select these two, go to Path, Difference, and then we're going to select these two on this side. The reason being is it doesn't always like to select and cut out multiple pieces all at once. That means I've done my whole black and white outline. If you copy this and you paste it, since we have the multiple colors over one another, what we can do is then just alter one of these two. If we carefully select all of these outside nodes, all the ones that are residing on the outside of this design, and we subtract those, what we have is just a fill inside, and what we want is the yellow. So I am going to just tweak this until I find a yellow that I like, which I feel like is somewhere right around there. Now that I have made my fill layer, which looks like this, which is just the inside here, and as you can see, this is why we started with the black the way we did, because then it made it to where we are only covering the areas that need to be yellow. This area does not need to be yellow. So if we select these, and then we select the minus tool there, and then select these as well, we're almost done with our Pikachu. Because of the way these layers work, we could always just go through and copy paste this one more time for these, but you could also zoom in, and let's say you just wanted to fill this area and you didn't have a lot of time to prep it. What you can do is you can just make sure you are inside of the black here, so there's very little overlap. Now, if we want to make that red, we'll see what's going to be a little bit weird with this. So if we fill this with red, you can see that doesn't look very good. But if we take this and we lower it until it is below the black outline, it now looks nice and consistent. So we can copy, paste. Now again, it is more ideal to just have it fit just inside of here so you don't have any overlap, but depending on your particular circumstances, that may be a good option for you. And so with that, we've traced this entire Pikachu. So now we have our three different layers, and if you notice, compared to if we did this image trace one more time, now in this case we have a red layer, and we have a gray layer, and we have a black layer, and we have an off yellow layer, which I don't believe was even a necessary part of that. So that separated that into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors, even if I asked it to to do 4. And then you notice how many more parts and how many more layers are on there that are not very necessary. So as you can see here, it breaks it down into the black, the yellow, and then the red when we did this by hand. Otherwise, this made a different layer for each of the sets of shapes, but you don't have all the separation that you needed. So you're going to be using so much more. That's why, generally speaking, you're always going to be better off manually tracing it, even if it takes a little bit longer. So thanks for joining us this week. I hope this was informative and you learned something cool with it. Please feel free to try this out on your own designs. This is something that is very important, helpful, and necessary to be able to do a lot of other work within the Makerspace. We look forward to seeing you soon, and we will see you next week in another video.